They thought it was all a game, a lark to break the monotony of their privileged lives. They harassed Clara, the waitress, with their crude jokes and entitled demands, reveling in her discomfort. They sought to humiliate her, to diminish her spirit for their own amusement. Then, in a moment of unspeakable cruelty, they crossed a line. They poured scalding hot coffee on her, holding her down, reveling in her pain, ensuring she couldn't escape their torment. It was, without a doubt, the single biggest mistake of their shallow, coddled lives. Because in the quietest corner of the diner, by the large, dark window, something shifted. A switch, unseen and silent, flipped. A Navy SEAL, a man forged in the crucible of combat, and his loyal combat dog, a veteran of countless battles, were done being silent observers. They had witnessed enough. And what happened next? It was a reckoning. A brutal, swift, and undeniably just response that far exceeded anything those entitled brats could have ever imagined. You needed to see the abject terror dawn on their faces, the precise moment the realization hit them. They had chosen the wrong target. They had messed with forces they couldn't possibly comprehend. Subscribe now. Prepare to witness a darkness they awakened. Clara had been a fixture at the Lonesome Pine Diner for 3 years. The diner itself was a time capsule, a relic of a simpler era. It was a beacon of comforting normalcy in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. The dark red vinyl booths, worn smooth with age, the chrome stools that spun with a satisfying, almost musical squeak, the black and white checkered floor, softened by the passage of countless footsteps. All of it was familiar, safe. The air, a comforting blend of the savory aroma of greasy burgers, the robust scent of strong, black coffee, and the sweet, inviting fragrance of freshly baked apple pie, always smelled like home. It was more than a job. It was her sanctuary. She was 22 years old, diligently saving every hard-earned tip towards her dream of attending community college. She envisioned herself as a teacher, shaping young minds, making a real difference in the world. She particularly cherished the quiet solitude of the graveyard shift, the long-haul truckers who, weary from their journeys, called her darling with genuine affection, the elderly couples who held hands across the table over steaming mugs of coffee, the peaceful hours before the sun peeked over the horizon. It was a life built on quiet dignity, a carefully constructed tower of small hopes, each one meticulously stacked upon the other. Tonight, however, that tower was about to come crashing down around her. The 3 young men had sauntered in an hour earlier, radiating an aura of loud, obnoxious self-importance. Their varsity jackets, emblazoned with the school's logo, screamed their status as local royalty. The stars of the football team, untouchable gods in their own small-town universe. They'd swaggered into her section, claiming booth number 4 as their territory. And from the moment they sat down, it became a game, a calculated exercise in subtle, yet insidious harassment. "Hey, sweetheart, you got a boyfriend?" One of them drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. "This coffee tastes like mud. You gonna make me a fresh pot?" With a smile, she endured it all with the practiced, weary patience of someone who had, unfortunately, grown accustomed to being treated as invisible, as less than human. She refilled their coffees, biting back her own retort, took their orders for 3 grand slam breakfasts, and tried to shrink into the background, hoping to become as insignificant as possible. But making yourself small, she had learned, never truly worked when predators were actively seeking easy prey. The situation escalated sharply when she brought their food. One of them, the ringleader, a particularly loathsome specimen with a cruel twist permanently etched into his mouth named Brad, accidentally knocked his glass of orange juice onto the floor. "Whoops," he sneered, his eyes glinting with malicious intent. "Clumsy me. You gonna get that, sweetheart?" She did. On her hands and knees, she scrubbed at the sticky mess with a damp rag, the sugary citrus clinging to her skin. She could feel their eyes boring into her, hear their low, appreciative chuckles, the sound of vultures circling their prey. It was as she stood up, her knees aching, that Brad made his move. He grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, deliberately meant to inflict pain. "Hey," he said, his voice dropping to a falsely intimate tone that sent shivers down her spine. "We're bored," he leered. "You gonna entertain us? Maybe a little dance? I bet you got some moves." Panic, cold and sharp, began to seep into her, replacing the weary annoyance that had been her constant companion. "Please," she said, her voice rising despite her efforts to control it, cracking with a fear she could no longer suppress. "Let me go. I have other customers." That was the wrong thing to say. It challenged their perceived dominance, bruised their fragile egos. The other two, his loyal lackeys, Mitch and Derek, were out of the booth in an instant, flanking her, each seizing one of her arms in a vice-like grip. Brad stood up, looming over her, casting a long, menacing shadow. He picked up his coffee mug. It was still half full, the dark liquid steaming ominously. "You know," he said, his voice sickeningly conversational, "you're right. The service here is pretty cold. I think you need to warm up." That's when he poured it. Slowly, deliberately. At first, it was just a trickle, a dark stain blooming on her apron, the heat searing through the fabric. She gasped, flinching back in instinctive revulsion, but his friends held her firmly in place, their eyes alight with cruel glee. Then he tilted the mug further, and the full scalding stream hit her chest, soaking through the thin cotton of her uniform, burning her skin. A strangled cry, a sound of pure agony and humiliation, escaped her lips. The heat was intense, unbearable, a shocking, painful brand of degradation. The laughter erupted around her, loud, brutish, and utterly devoid of humanity. They didn't see the man in the corner. Nobody ever did, at least not at first. He was a part of the shadows, a silent, watchful presence tucked away in a booth by the large picture window. He wore faded digital camo pants and a plain gray t-shirt, clothes that spoke of practicality, not style. His posture was ramrod straight, even in relaxation, a testament to years of unwavering discipline. A magnificent German shepherd, a creature of immense power and intelligence with watchful, knowing eyes, lay perfectly still at his feet, hidden under the table. The man's name was Jake. He had been observing the entire scene unfold with the calm, analytical focus of a seasoned predator assessing a potential threat. His hands, resting on the worn Formica tabletop, were still, betraying no outward emotion. But his eyes, a cool, flinty gray, had narrowed, missing nothing. He had come in an hour before the boys, seeking only a moment of peace. He'd ordered a black coffee and a slice of apple pie, of which he'd only taken 2 bites. He was a ghost, a man passing through, desperately craving silence on a long and lonely road. The dog, whose name was Rex, was a retired military working dog, a veteran of 3 tours of duty himself, having served alongside Jake in some of the most dangerous corners of the world. They were a team, their bond forged in the fires of combat, strengthened by things that could never be spoken aloud. 2 old soldiers, both bearing unseen scars, trying to find a quiet, forgotten place in a world that had become far too loud. Jake had seen the boys come in. He'd registered their swagger, heard their loud, privileged voices echoing through the diner. He'd seen the way they looked at Clara, their eyes filled with entitlement and disdain, the way they diminished her, stripped her of her dignity with a single, dismissive glance. He'd made a conscious decision to stay out of it. "Not your fight, Jake. She's a civilian. They're just kids. Loud, obnoxious kids." He told himself all the things you tell yourself to avoid the inevitable storm you know is brewing. But when Brad grabbed her wrist, Jake's right hand had clenched into a fist, the knuckles bone white. When they held her down, a low, almost imperceptible growl rumbled from under the table. Rex felt the almost imperceptible change in his partner's posture, the minute tightening of the muscles in his leg. And when the coffee was poured, when Clara's cry of pain and shame sliced through the din of the diner, something deep inside Jake finally shattered. It wasn't anger, not exactly. Anger was too hot, too chaotic, too uncontrolled. What settled over him was a profound, glacial calm, a sense of unwavering purpose. It was the same feeling he'd get just before a room clearance, the moment when everything went silent, when all the noise faded away, and the world slowed to a crawl. A moment of hyperclarity where every variable became a clearly defined piece on a chessboard. He didn't stand up. Not yet. He spoke, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the laughter like a scalpel through flesh. Let her go. The three boys turned, their smug faces a mixture of surprise and irritation. They saw a man, maybe in his mid-30s, with a weathered face and a quiet intensity in his eyes. He didn't look particularly imposing sitting down. He just looked calm. Brad, quickly recovering his bravado, puffed out his chest, attempting to reassert his dominance. What did you say, old man? This doesn't concern you. Why don't you finish your pie and mind your own business? Jake's eyes didn't waver, didn't leave Brad's face. I said, let the young lady go. And then you're going to apologize to her. Mitch, one of the boys still holding Clara, sneered. Or what? You and your mutt gonna do something about it? At the word mutt, Rex's head snapped up from the floor. His ears pricked forward, his body tense. Jake gave a barely perceptible signal with his hand. A subtle gesture that only Rex could understand, and the dog settled back down. But his eyes were now fixed on the three boys with an unnerving, laser-like focus. Jake slowly, deliberately slid out of the booth. He stood to his full height, and the boys, for the first time, seemed to register the breadth of his shoulders, the lean, powerful build beneath the plain clothes, the way he carried himself, not like a street brawler, but like a highly trained precision weapon. He took 2 steps forward, stopping a good 10 feet from them. He wasn't trying to intimidate them with proximity, with brute force. His mere presence was intimidation enough. Last chance, Jake said, his voice still dangerously quiet, but laced with an undeniable undercurrent of steel. Let her go. Apologize. And pay your bill. Then walk out of here. Brad laughed, a nervous, brittle sound that betrayed his growing unease. He shoved Clara away from him, and she stumbled back against the counter, clutching her scalded chest, sobbing quietly, her body racked with pain and fear. The three boys now faced Jake, forming a loose semicircle, attempting to project an image of unity and strength. They were big kids, used to winning through sheer mass and aggressive intimidation. You think you can take all 3 of us, tough guy? Brad said, taking a tentative step forward, trying to regain control of the situation. I don't want to, Jake replied, his gaze sweeping over them, assessing, categorizing, analyzing their weaknesses. Brad, the leader, all ego, no brains. Mitch, the follower, all brute strength, easily manipulated. Derek, the third wheel, already looking unsure, his eyes darting nervously towards the door. He paused. But if you force the issue, it won't be a fight. It will be a lesson. That was the final straw for Brad. His ego couldn't handle the humiliation. With a roar of pure, unthinking rage, fueled by years of unchecked privilege, he charged, swinging a wild, telegraphed haymaker aimed at Jake's head. What happened next was so fast, so brutally efficient, that Clara, watching through her tear-filled eyes, barely processed it. It was over in a heartbeat. Jake didn't retreat. He moved in, meeting the attack head-on. He deflected the clumsy punch with his left forearm, the movement minimal, almost casual, a testament to years of training and muscle memory. At the same time, his right hand shot out, not in a clenched fist, but with his fingers stiffened, striking Brad precisely in the solar plexus. It wasn't a knockout punch. It was a shutdown. All the air left Brad's lungs in a pained whoosh. His eyes bulged, his charge instantly transforming into a forward collapse as he clutched his stomach, gagging and gasping for air that wouldn't come. He was neutralized, rendered completely harmless, reduced to a writhing, helpless mess on the checkered floor. The diner was silent except for Brad's choked gasps, a sound that filled the space with a grim sense of satisfaction. The entire confrontation had taken less than 2 seconds. Mitch, seeing his leader fall so ignominiously, bellowed inarticulately and lunged forward, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to prove his loyalty. He was bigger than Brad, but also slower, less coordinated. Jake simply sidestepped the lunge, hooked his foot deftly behind Mitch's ankle, and used the boy's own momentum to send him crashing heavily into a nearby table. Plates and silverware clattered to the floor, adding to the chaotic scene. Before Mitch could even register what had happened, before he could even begin to push himself up from the wreckage, Jake was on him, not with wild, uncontrolled strikes, but with precise, calculated control. He twisted Mitch's arm into a secure lock behind his back, applying just the right amount of pressure to inflict maximum pain without causing permanent damage. "Stay down," Jake commanded, his voice still calm, but now with an unmistakable edge of steel that brooked no argument. Mitch, his face pressed against the sticky, debris-strewn floor, whimpered in pain and shock, the realization that he was completely outmatched finally sinking in. Derek, the third boy, had frozen, rooted to the spot. He hadn't moved from his place in the loose semicircle. His hands were half raised in a gesture of surrender, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked from the gasping, writhing Brad to the pinned and whimpering Mitch, and then to Jake, whose flinty eyes now settled on him, radiating an almost palpable sense of menace. Jake didn't even have to speak. The message was clear. Derek slowly, carefully got down on his knees and put his hands behind his head, as if he'd seen it countless times in a movie, knowing that resistance was not only futile, but also potentially life-threatening. The fight, if it could even be called that, was over. It was then that the diner's front door chimed, the sound cutting through the tense silence like a knife. A state trooper, a large, capable-looking man in his 40s named Officer Miller, walked in for his usual late-night coffee, a routine he followed most nights. He took in the scene in an instant, his experienced eyes registering every detail. The sobbing waitress with the coffee-stained uniform, the 3 high school jocks, one gasping on the floor, one pinned in a painful arm lock, one kneeling in abject surrender, and the calm, quiet man in the camo pants and gray t-shirt standing in the center of it all, radiating an aura of quiet authority. Officer Miller's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, hovering near the holster. "Everybody freeze. What in God's name is going on here?" Clara found her voice first, her sobs slowly transforming into ragged, urgent words. "They attacked me. They held me down and poured hot coffee on me. He helped me." She pointed a trembling finger at Jake. Jake, seeing the officer's hand hovering near his weapon, slowly and deliberately released Mitch's arm, standing up and taking a step back, his hands visible and open at his sides, signaling his peaceful intentions. He gave a slight, almost invisible signal, and Rex, who had emerged silently from under the table, but remained perfectly still, lay back down at his feet. Officer Miller's eyes scanned the room, piecing together the puzzle. He saw the empty coffee mug, the dark stain on Clara's uniform, the raw terror etched on her face, the sheer dominance emanating from the quiet man in the corner. He focused his attention on the boys. Brad Jenkins? Mitch Thompson? Derek? Is this true? Brad, still wheezing and clutching his solar plexus, could only nod weakly, unable to speak. Mitch, rubbing his throbbing shoulder, just stared at the floor, avoiding eye contact. Derek, still kneeling on the floor, started crying, his bravado completely evaporated. "We're sorry. We were just messing around. He attacked us," he blubbered, pointing a trembling finger at Jake, desperately trying to shift the blame. Officer Miller looked at Jake, his expression unreadable. "Sir, I'm going to need you to tell me your side of the story." Jake met his gaze evenly, his eyes unflinching. "Officer, the young lady is telling the truth. They assaulted her. I intervened to stop the assault. I used the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat." The way he spoke, the precise wording, "neutralize the threat," coupled with his calm demeanor and military bearing, clicked something into place for Officer Miller. He looked at Jake again, really looked at him, seeing him for who he was. The short-cropped hair, the calm under pressure, the efficient, non-lethal takedowns. He glanced at the German shepherd, whose disciplined posture was anything but that of a typical pet. "Are you currently serving, son?" Miller asked, his tone subtly shifting from suspicion to something closer to respect, his eyes narrowing. Formerly, sir, Jake replied, his voice firm and clear. Naval Special Warfare. A slow nod from the officer. I see. He turned back to the boys, his expression hardening, all traces of sympathy now gone. All right, you three, on your feet. You have the right to remain silent. He began reciting the Miranda rights as he cuffed Brad and Mitch, then Derek, his movements efficient and practiced. The fight had completely drained out of them, replaced by the cold, hard reality of handcuffs and the looming threat of criminal charges. As Officer Miller led the three shamefaced boys out to his cruiser, the diner fell into a profound silence. The only sounds were the low hum of the neon sign outside and Clara's ragged breathing. She was leaning heavily against the counter, trembling uncontrollably, the adrenaline crash hitting her full force, threatening to overwhelm her. Jake walked over to her, his movements slow and non-threatening, giving her plenty of space. He didn't try to touch her to offer false comfort. He simply stood a few feet away, his presence a solid, calming anchor in the midst of the storm. Are you all right? He asked, his voice now soft, the steel gone from it, replaced by genuine concern. She shook her head, fresh tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know. It burns. He nodded, understanding. We need to get that cooled down. He moved to the soda fountain, filled a clean bus tub with cold water, and grabbed a stack of clean napkins. He brought them over to her, his movements efficient and purposeful. Here, he said, offering her the makeshift compress. Press these against it. It will help. His simple act of kindness, coming after the violence and the cruelty she had just endured, was what finally broke her. She sobbed, great heaving sobs of relief and delayed terror, the pent-up emotions finally finding release. He let her cry, standing guard, a silent sentinel in the wreckage of her evening, allowing her to grieve and process what had happened. When Officer Miller returned, he took statements from both Clara and Jake, meticulously documenting the details of the assault. He confirmed that the diner's security cameras had captured the entire event, providing irrefutable evidence of the boys' actions. This is open and shut, he told Clara, his voice reassuring. Assault, unlawful restraint, they'll be facing serious charges. And you, Master Chief, he said to Jake, his tone respectful, acknowledging his military rank. You acted as a textbook Good Samaritan. No charges will be filed against you. In fact, the department will be thanking you for your service. Jake just nodded, his expression unchanged. Titles and thanks meant little to him. He had simply done what he felt was right, what he had been trained to do. After the officer left, promising to send a paramedic to check on Clara, an awkward silence fell over the diner. The place was a mess. Overturned tables, broken plates, the lingering stench of fear and spilled coffee. It was a scene of utter chaos. I should clean this up, Clara whispered, her voice barely audible, filled with shame and a sense of obligation. No, Jake said firmly, his voice brooking no argument. You should sit down. He gently guided her to a relatively clean booth, his touch surprisingly gentle. Then, to her astonishment, he started cleaning. He righted the overturned table, carefully picked up the broken pieces of ceramic, mopped the floor with an efficiency that spoke of a lifetime of discipline and meticulous attention to detail. Rex followed him, a quiet, comforting shadow, his presence a silent reassurance. Clara watched him, this strange, quiet man who had descended into her nightmare like an avenging angel and was now meticulously cleaning her floor. Who are you? She finally asked, her voice filled with wonder and gratitude. He stopped his work, pausing for a moment, and looked at her, his eyes meeting hers. My name is Jake, he said simply. And this is Rex. Thank you, Jake, she said, the words feeling utterly inadequate for the debt she felt she owed him. You didn't have to. You could have gotten hurt. A ghost of a smile, barely perceptible, touched his lips. No, he said simply, a hint of steel returning to his voice. I couldn't have. He finished cleaning, restoring order to the chaotic scene, and sat down across from her, not too close, giving her space, respecting her boundaries. The paramedics arrived, checked her burn. It was red and painful, but thankfully not severe enough to require a hospital trip. They applied a cooling gel and a sterile bandage, offering words of comfort and reassurance. As they were packing up their equipment, the diner door chimed again, signaling another arrival. An older man in his 60s, flustered and out of breath, rushed in, his face etched with worry. It was Al, the owner of the Lonesome Pine Diner. "My God, Clara, I got a call from the state police. What happened? Are you okay?" He rushed to her side, his face a mask of genuine concern. Clara, her voice now growing stronger, explained the whole story, recounting the events of the evening, the horror of the assault, and Jake's unexpected intervention. Jake's silent presence gave her the courage to tell it all, to finally give voice to the trauma she had experienced. Al listened, his face growing darker with every word, his fists clenching in barely suppressed rage. When she finished, he turned to Jake, his eyes filled with gratitude. I don't know what to say," Al stammered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. From the bottom of my heart. You saved my girl." He looked around the spotless diner, taking in the restored order. "And you cleaned up? You didn't have to do that." "It was the right thing to do," Jake said, uncomfortable with the outpouring of praise. Nothing is ever on the house for you ever again," Al declared, his voice firm and unwavering. "You hear me? For life." Jake gave a small, grateful nod, acknowledging Al's generosity. He stood up, ready to disappear back into the shadows. "I should be going." "Wait," Clara said, standing as well, her voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and a desperate hope that he wouldn't leave. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug, her body trembling slightly. He stiffened for a second, surprised by the sudden contact, a lifetime of avoiding intimacy kicking in. Then, slowly, awkwardly, he patted her back, a simple, almost clumsy gesture that spoke volumes. It was the gesture of a man not used to human touch, a man who had spent years building walls around his heart, but who understood the necessity of connection, the power of human compassion. "Thank you," she whispered into his shoulder, her voice choked with emotion. He simply nodded, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling within him. He turned to leave, Rex falling into step beside him, a silent, loyal companion. As he reached the door, Clara called out one last time, her voice filled with a desperate plea for connection. "Jake?" He paused, looking back at her, his face unreadable. "Where are you going?" He looked out the window at the dark, empty highway stretching into the unknown, a symbol of his solitary existence. "Somewhere quiet," he said, his voice barely audible. And then he was gone, the door chiming softly behind him, swallowed by the night as if he were a dream. But he wasn't a dream. The bandage on Clara's chest was real, a tangible reminder of the violence she had endured and the kindness she had received. The absence of the bullies, now facing the consequences of their actions, was real. And the feeling he left behind, a feeling of safety, of justice, of a restored faith in the goodness of the world, that was the most real thing of all. She never saw him again. But sometimes, on a quiet night at the Lonesome Pine Diner, when the moon was high and the highway was silent, she would look at booth number 3 in the corner, the one by the window, and she would feel a sense of peace settle over her, a quiet reassurance that she was safe. The world had monsters, yes, but it also had guardians. Quiet men with quiet dogs who walked in the shadows, ensuring that the light in the diner, and in the hearts of decent people, would never go out. This story is a reminder that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes help arrives from the most unexpected places. The actions of one person, one selfless act of bravery, can change the entire course of a day, or even a lifetime. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Stories like this connect us all, no matter where we are. So, from which part of the country are you watching this video?